In the early 1900s, the Western world appeared to have reached a permanent peak of scientific discovery and industrial expansion. This progress was visible in the bustling streets and mechanized commerce of the era. Public optimism remained high, as urban society thrived under the assumption that peaceful development would continue indefinitely. A continent-wide conflict seemed impossible. The prevailing belief was that advanced economies were too interconnected to risk the destruction of a major war. The same industrial systems driving Europe's prosperity were mass-producing the artillery shells and rifles that would soon be used to dismantle it. In 1914, Europe functioned as a highly volatile, interdependent network of 5 massive empires: Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. This network was destabilized by an accelerating arms race and an aggressive competition for global resources, forcing these imperial borders into constant friction. To manage these tensions, empires formed a web of secret mutual defense treaties. Combined with intense ideological fervor in the Balkans, these alliances rigidly locked the major powers together. Military commanders operated under the assumption that any conflict would involve the entire alliance network. They did not plan for isolated local battles. This architecture ensured that any single diplomatic failure would bypass localized negotiation and automatically pull the entire continent into total war. The catalyst for this collapse arrived on June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was the public face of the empire's power in the region. His assassination by Gavrilo Princip, a young revolutionary, provided the spark that the alliance network was built to react to. This event activated the mutual defense treaties. Within weeks, the interconnected lines of the alliance map triggered a cascading chain of war declarations across Europe. Diplomacy failed because the industrialized military mobilization schedules were inflexible. Once the transport of millions of troops to the borders began, the gears of the conflict could not be stopped. When soldiers marched off in the summer of 1914, many believed they would achieve a quick victory and return home by the year's end. This belief relied on 19th century military doctrine. Generals planned for rapid infantry movement, sending men forward in highly visible uniforms and exposed marching formations. Germany's Schlieffen Plan relied on this speed, aiming to defeat France in the west before the Russian army could fully mobilize in the east. However, industrialized defensive weapons completely neutralized human forward momentum. Traditional offensive strategies were unable to overcome modern engineering. As shown here, rapid-fire machine guns and heavy artillery created overlapping arcs of fire. For infantry crossing open ground, the probability of survival dropped to 0. The resulting trench warfare represented a technological deadlock where defensive firepower permanently outpaced offensive mobility. Millions were forced into a static landscape of mud and extreme cold, where thousands of lives were often traded to gain a few meters. To break the deadlock, commanders turned to attrition. At Verdun in 1916, Germany attempted to bleed the French army through continuous heavy artillery fire. The British response at the Somme was equally devastating, resulting in 60,000 casualties on the very first day of the offensive. Both sides escalated to chemical warfare, using poison gas to try and clear the opposing trenches of defenders. Engineers eventually introduced mechanized armor, the tank, designed specifically to crush through barbed wire and cross the trench gap. While generals managed the war as a mathematical calculation of attrition, the frontline soldiers bore the reality of being treated as expendable resources. The unsustainable rate of casualties forced empires to expand the war globally, seeking new human and industrial capital from their colonies to continue the fight. By 1917, the strain fractured the Russian Empire. Domestic starvation and mass demands for peace collapsed the government and pulled Russia out of the conflict. In 1917, the United States entered the conflict, bringing an overwhelming influx of fresh troops and untouched industrial power. This surge in logistics and manpower finally broke the stalemate against an economically exhausted and starving German military. The collapse of the German military apparatus led directly to a ceasefire on November 11, 1918. When the guns finally fell silent across the devastated continent, the final human cost reached over 16 million dead. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles functioned as a severe, punitive punishment against the defeated nations, rather than a stabilizing mechanism. By imposing crushing economic penalties and stripping away territories, the treaty baked deep systemic resentments into the foundation of the post-war order. The war permanently erased the old world order. The Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires were dismantled. The new borders often ignored existing ethnic ties, creating volatile friction zones of unresolved nationalism in Europe and the Middle East. The surviving generation returned to societies where the pre-war social and economic order had disintegrated. World War I forced the transition to industrialized warfare and redrew the global map. But it failed to resolve the underlying human flaws of nationalism and militarism, leaving a timer ticking toward a second global catastrophe.